They didn't even look at me when they said it. After 16 years of being their perfect daughter, after straight A's in Sunday church services, after believing family meant unconditional love, my mother stood in our kitchen doorway and delivered the words that would haunt me for decades. "You're pregnant, you're dead to us. Pack your bags and get out." No tears, no second chances, no room for discussion, just a cold decree that erased me from the family I thought I belonged to forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Vivian Cross, and from wherever you're watching this, stay with me. Have you ever had the people who were supposed to protect you become the ones who destroy you? Have you ever been 16, stared, and abandoned by the only safety net you've ever known? The pregnancy test had two pink lines. I remember staring at it in the tiny bathroom of Riverside High School, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the plastic stick. I was a junior honor roll student, debate team captain, and the daughter who never caused trouble. I was also 3 weeks late and terrified. The father was Jake Thornfield, my boyfriend of 8 months, and the quarterback everyone in Millbrook Falls adored. When I told him, his face went white, then red, then he stammered something about college scholarships and how this would ruin everything. He suggested I handle it quietly and promised we'd figure it out together. That promise lasted exactly 4 days before he started dating Amber Walsh and pretending I didn't exist. But Jake's betrayal was nothing compared to what was waiting for me at home. I practiced the conversation in my head for weeks. I imagined my mother, Eleanor Cross, sitting me down with her usual calm wisdom. I pictured my father, Henry Cross, being disappointed but ultimately supportive. They were pillars of the community. He ran the local hardware store, she taught second grade at Millbrook Elementary. We went to church every Sunday, said grace before dinner, and they'd always told me I could come to them with anything. They lied. I chose a Tuesday evening when my younger brother Danny was at soccer practice. The house smelled like my mother's pot roast and she was humming while she set the table. Normal. Safe. The last moment of my childhood, though I didn't know it yet. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, like this video. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Mom, Dad, I need to tell you something important. They sat down, concern etched on their faces. My mother reached for my father's hand, the way she always did when she was worried about one of us kids. "I'm pregnant." The silence that followed wasn't the thoughtful pause I'd hoped for. It was the kind of silence that comes before an avalanche. My father's face turned the color of brick, and my mother's hand flew to her chest like I'd physically struck her. "How could you do this to us?" Those were the first words out of my mother's mouth. Not, "Are you okay?" or "What do you need?" but "How could I do this to them?" As if my 16-year-old mistake was a calculated attack on their reputation. My father stood up so fast his chair scraped against the linoleum floor. "This is what we get," he said to my mother, as if I wasn't even in the room. All those years of trying to raise her right, and she throws it away to be some teenage tramp. "Dad, please." "Don't you dare call me that." His voice was ice cold, colder than I'd ever heard it. "You want to act like an adult? You can live like one. Somewhere else." My mother never said a word. She just sat there, tears streaming down her face, but not tears of compassion, tears of shame. I was her shame now. "I can finish school," I said desperately. "I can graduate, and—" "You're not graduating from Riverside. You're not walking across that stage with a belly full of bastard child and embarrassing this family any further." The word bastard hit me like a slap. This was my mother who taught me to tie my shoes and helped me with homework and tucked me in at night for years. Now she was using words that made my unborn child sound like a curse. "Pack your things," my father said. "You've got 1 hour." Where am I supposed to go? That's not our problem anymore. I stood in my bedroom, the room with the pink walls I'd begged for when I turned 12, and tried to fit my life into a duffel bag. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the plastic stick. I kept waiting for one of them to come upstairs and say they'd changed their minds, that we'd figure it out together. Instead, my mother appeared in the doorway holding a garbage bag. "Leave the uniform," she said, referring to my Riverside High School cheerleading uniform hanging in the closet. "You won't be needing it anymore." The finality in her voice broke something inside me. I was 16, pregnant, and about to be homeless, but somehow the sight of my mother treating my belongings like trash hurt the most. "Mom, please, I'm sorry. I made a mistake, but I'm still your daughter." She looked at me for a long moment, and for a second, I thought I saw the woman who used to read me bedtime stories. Then her expression hardened again. My daughter wouldn't have gotten herself into this situation. My daughter would have thought about her family before she spread her legs for some boy. The cruelty of that statement took my breath away. This wasn't just disappointment or anger. It was calculated punishment designed to make sure I understood that I was no longer welcome in the only home I'd ever known.
I finished packing in silence. When I dragged my duffel bag downstairs, my father was waiting by the front door with his arms crossed. My mother was nowhere to be seen. "Don't come back," he said as I stepped onto the porch. "Don't call, don't write, don't drive by the house. As far as this family is concerned, you don't exist anymore." The door slammed behind me with such force that the decorative wreath, the one I'd helped my mother hang just 2 weeks earlier, fell to the ground. I stood on the sidewalk of Elm Street, the street where I had learned to ride a bike and played hopscotch with the neighbor kids, and realized I had nowhere to go. It was October in Connecticut, and the evening air had that sharp bite that promised winter was coming. I had $43 in my wallet, a duffel bag full of clothes, and a baby growing inside me that had just cost me everything I ever known. The first night, I slept in Riverside Park, on the bench by the duck pond where my family used to have picnics when I was little. I used my winter coat as a blanket and tried not to think about what would happen when it got too cold to sleep outside. The next morning, I walked to school like nothing had happened. I sat through first period English and tried to focus on Shakespeare when all I could think about was where I would sleep that night. During lunch, I went to the guidance counselor's office. Mrs. Patterson was a kind woman in her 50s who'd helped me plan my college applications just months earlier. When I told her about my situation, the pregnancy, the rejection, the homelessness, she went pale. "Oh, honey," she said softly, "let me make some phone calls." That's how I ended up in the Riverside Youth Shelter, a converted house on the outskirts of town that most people pretended didn't exist. It was clean and safe, but it was temporary. I could stay for 30 days while they tried to find me a more permanent solution. The other girls in the shelter were older, some with stories that made mine seem almost mundane. There was Crystal, 19 and aging out of foster care. There was Ashley, 17 and fleeing an abusive home. There was Carmen, 16 like me, but pregnant with her second child. "First time?" Carmen asked on my second night, nodding toward my still flat stomach. "Yeah," she said. "Family kicked you out?" "Yeah." "They always do," she said, matter-of-factly. "Mine did it twice. You learn to survive." But I didn't want to just survive. I wanted to prove them wrong. I wanted to show my parents that their perfect daughter was still in there, even if she'd made one catastrophic mistake. I finished my junior year through Riverside's alternative education program, taking classes in the evenings and on weekends. It wasn't the graduation I'd dreamed of, but I walked across a small stage in a community center and received my diploma while 5 months pregnant. My parents weren't there to see it. Neither was Jake, who was probably celebrating his college scholarship at some party I'd never be invited to again. But I was there, and that had to be enough. The youth shelter helped me apply for every assistance program available: food stamps, WIC, Medicaid, temporary housing assistance. The caseworkers were kind but overworked, and they all had the same message:
Being a teenage mother was going to be hard, and I needed to adjust my expectations accordingly. I refused to adjust them. When I was 7 months along, I got a job at Riverside Diner, working the night shift as a waitress. The owner, Frank Castellano, was a gruff man in his 60s who hired me because I was the only teenager who showed up on time and didn't spend the shift texting. "You work hard," he told me after my first week. "I respect that. But this ain't no career, kid. You got a baby coming. You need a plan." He was right. I needed more than minimum wage and good intentions. I needed an education, a real career, something that could support both me and my child. But how was I supposed to go to college when I could barely afford rent on a studio apartment? That's when I learned about the Riverside Community College's accelerated nursing program. It was intensive, demanding, and expensive. But nurses made good money, and there was always demand for healthcare workers. If I could somehow manage to get through the 2-year program, I could build a real life for my baby and myself. The guidance counselor at RCC looked at my application and frowned. "You're 17, pregnant, and working nights. This program has a 90% completion rate, but that's for traditional students with family support. I'm not sure this is realistic for someone in your situation." What would make it realistic? Financial aid, childcare, a support system, and about 60 hours a week to dedicate to studying and clinical rotations. I had financial aid, barely. I had no childcare and no support system, but I had something else. A burning desire to prove that Eleanor and Henry Cross made the biggest mistake of their lives when they wrote off their daughter. I enrolled anyway.
When they placed my son in my arms for the first time, he was perfect. 7 pounds, 2 ounces, with a full head of dark hair and the most alert eyes I'd ever seen. I named him Oliver. It meant peaceful, because I wanted him to have something I'd never had. Looking down at his tiny face, I made him a promise. I promised that he would never feel unwanted, never doubt that he was loved, never have to choose between disappointing his parent and being true to himself. I promised that I would build a life good enough for both of us, no matter what it took. I was back in class 6 weeks later, Oliver sleeping in his carrier while I took notes on pharmacology and anatomy. My professors thought I was crazy. My classmates whispered about the teenage mother who brought her baby to lectures. But I didn't care what anyone thought anymore. I'd learned that other people's approval was a luxury I couldn't afford. The nursing program was brutal. Clinical rotations at 5 a.m., study groups that ran past midnight, exams that required memorizing thousands of medical terms and procedures. I failed my first pharmacology test and cried in the bathroom, wondering if everyone who'd said this was impossible had been right. But then I looked at Oliver, sleeping peacefully in his crib in our tiny apartment, and remembered why I was doing this. Not for revenge against my parents, though part of me did want to prove them wrong. Not for redemption, though I still carried the shame of their disappointment. I was doing this because my son deserved a mother who fought for their future, even when the odds were stacked against her. 18 months later, I graduated second in my class. The dean called my name, Vivian Cross, Bachelor of Science in Nursing, graduating with honors, and I walked across the stage in my cap and gown while Oliver, now a toddler, clapped from the audience. Frank from the diner was there, along with 2 of my professors and Mrs. Patterson from high school. It wasn't the family celebration I'd once imagined, but it was mine. I got a job at Hartford General Hospital in the pediatric ICU. The work was intense, emotionally draining, and exactly what I was meant to do. Caring for sick children and supporting their families felt like the most important thing I'd ever done. And the salary, $65,000 a year, was more money than I'd ever dreamed of making. Oliver and I moved into a 2-bedroom apartment in a good neighborhood with excellent schools. I bought us furniture that wasn't secondhand, enrolled him in preschool, and started putting money into a college fund. We had dinner together every night, read bedtime stories, and went to the park on weekends. We built a life. Years passed. Oliver grew from a toddler into a curious, confident child who loved books and baseball and asking endless questions about everything. He knew he didn't have grandparents on my side of the family, but he never asked why. I'd told him they lived far away, which felt kinder than the truth. I advanced at the hospital, eventually becoming a charge nurse and then a nursing supervisor. I bought us a real house with a yard and a white picket fence, like something out of a magazine. Oliver had his own room, painted blue with glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling, and a swing set in the backyard. Sometimes when I was tucking him in at night, he would ask about his father. I told him that some people weren't ready to be parents, and that was okay, because we had each other. He seemed satisfied with that answer, though I knew more questions would come as he got older. What he never asked about, thankfully, were my parents. In Oliver's world, family meant the two of us, plus Frank from the diner, who'd become like a grandfather to him, and the friends we'd made along the way. It was a smaller family than most kids had, but it was filled with people who showed up when it mattered. I thought I'd successfully created a life separate from the people who had rejected me all those years ago. Millbrook Falls felt like a different universe from our comfortable life in Hartford. I'd built something better than what I'd lost, something stronger than what had been taken from me. Then, 3 weeks ago, my phone rang. I was in my kitchen helping 18-year-old Oliver with his college application essays when an unknown number appeared on the screen. I almost didn't answer, spam calls were so common, but something made me pick up. "Hello, is this Vivian Cross?" The voice was young, male, uncertain. "Yes, who is this?" "My name is Danny Cross. I think I'm your brother." The wooden spoon I'd been holding clattered to the floor. "Danny? My little brother who was at soccer practice the night I got kicked out? The boy who was 11 years old the last time I saw him, who would now be 29? The brother who probably grew up thinking his older sister had simply vanished from the family without an explanation? They'd rewritten history. In their version, I was the one who had abandoned the family, not the other way around. I was the one who chose to disappear, not the one who'd been erased.
Danny, there's a lot you don't know about what really happened. I figured there was. That's why I'm calling. I hired a private investigator to find you. Did you know you have a son? My heart stopped. How do you... The investigator was thorough. Oliver Cross Thornfield, 18 years old, honor student, accepted to 3 different colleges. He looks just like Dad did at that age, you know? Oliver looked up from his laptop at the mention of his name, curious about why I'd gone so pale. "What do you want, Danny?" "I want to know my nephew. And I think Mom and Dad want to know him too. They're not the same people they were back then, Viv. Dad had a heart attack last year, and Mom has diabetes. They're getting older, and I think they regret a lot of things." Regret. After 18 years of pretending I didn't exist, they regretted their choices. "They kicked me out," I said quietly, glancing at Oliver, who was now openly listening. "When I told them I was pregnant, they called me dead to them and told me never to come back." The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long, I thought the call had dropped. Jesus, Viv. They really said that? Word for word. I had no idea. They told me you'd gotten pregnant and decided you didn't want to be part of the family anymore. They made it sound like it was your choice. Of course they did. In their version, they were the victims of their wayward daughter's poor decisions. They were the ones who'd been abandoned and hurt. It wasn't my choice, Danny. I begged them to let me stay. I promised I'd finish school and make it work. They wouldn't even consider it. God, I'm so sorry. I wish I'd known. I wish I'd tried to find you sooner. It doesn't matter now. Oliver and I built a good life without them. I know you did. The investigator showed me articles about your work at the hospital, pictures of Oliver's academic achievements. You did an amazing job, sis. But would you consider letting them meet him? Just once? And there it was. The request I'd been dreading since the moment I heard Danny's voice.
They wanted to meet the grandson they'd never acknowledged, the child they called a bastard before he was even born. They wanted to step into the life I'd built from nothing and claim some piece of the success I'd fought for alone. I need to think about it, I told Danny. Of course, I'll give you my number. Take all the time you need. After I hung up, Oliver looked at me with concern. Mom, are you okay? Who was that? I sat down next to him at our kitchen table and our beautiful house that I'd bought with the career I'd built despite their rejection, and realized it was time to tell him the truth. That was your Uncle Danny, my brother. You have a brother? But you said you're family. I know what I said. It's complicated, sweetheart. I told him everything about the pregnancy, the rejection, the years of struggle and determination, about the parents who chose their reputation over their daughter, and the 18 years of silence that followed. Oliver listened with the kind of intensity he usually reserved for his favorite books, asking clarifying questions and processing the information with a maturity that reminded me he was no longer the little boy I used to read bedtime stories to. So they want to meet me now? He asked when I finished. That's what your Uncle Danny says. What do you want to do? It was such a simple question, but it carried the weight of nearly 20 years of pain, anger, and carefully constructed boundaries. What did I want to do? Part of me wanted to hang up the phone and pretend the call had never happened. I'd worked so hard to build a life independent of their approval or rejection. Oliver and I were happy. We were successful. We didn't need them. But another part of me, the part that was still 16 years old and desperate for their parents' love, wondered if this was the chance for reconciliation I'd never thought would come. And then there was Oliver himself. He was 18, legally an adult, capable of making his own decisions about whether he wanted to meet his grandparents. Did I have the right to make that choice for him? I think, I said carefully, that this is something you should decide for yourself. You're old enough to understand the situation and make your own choice about whether you want to meet them. Oliver nodded thoughtfully. Can I ask you something? Anything. Do you want to see them again? It was the question I'd been avoiding since the moment Danny called. Did I want to see Eleanor and Henry Cross again? Did I want to walk back into the house on Elm Street and face the people who'd treated their pregnant daughter like a stranger? Did I want to risk reopening wounds that had taken years to heal? The answer was complicated. I wanted closure. I wanted them to see what I'd accomplished without them, to understand that their rejection had been their loss, not mine. I wanted them to meet the grandson they'd missed 18 years of knowing, to see what an incredible young man he'd become despite their absence. But I also wanted an apology. I wanted acknowledgement that they'd been wrong, that they'd let fear and pride destroy their relationship with their daughter and cost them nearly 20 years with their grandson.
I don't know, I admitted, but I think you deserve the chance to know them, if that's what you want. Oliver was quiet for a long moment, then looked at me with those alert eyes that had been studying the world since the day he was born. Would you go with me, if I decided I wanted to meet them? The thought of walking back into that house terrified me, but Oliver was asking for my support, the way I'd always been there for him. Of course I would. Then I think I'd like to meet them, but only if you're there. And that's how I found myself, 3 days later, standing in Danny's living room in Millbrook Falls, preparing to face the people who'd spent 18 years pretending I didn't exist. But what happened when they walked through that door, when they saw the life I'd built and the man their grandson had become, would change all of us in ways none of us expected. Because Eleanor and Henry Cross were about to learn that the daughter they'd thrown away had returned to someone they never could have imagined. And they were about to discover that sometimes the biggest mistake of your life doesn't just cost you. It transforms the person you wronged into someone with the power to forgive you, or not. In part 2, I'll tell you exactly what happened when I came face to face with my parents for the first time in 18 years, and how her reaction to meeting Oliver revealed something that would change everything I thought I knew about the night they kicked me out. In the last video, I told you how my parents kicked me out at 16 for being pregnant, and how 18 years later, my brother Danny called asking if they could meet my son Oliver. But what I discovered when I walked back into that house in Millbrook Falls revealed a truth so shocking that it changed everything I thought I knew about the night they destroyed our family. My name is Vivian Cross, and this is what happened when I came face to face with my parents for the first time in 18 years. The drive from Hartford to Millbrook Falls took 47 minutes, but it felt like traveling back in time. Oliver sat in the passenger seat of my Honda, unusually quiet as we passed familiar landmarks I hadn't seen in nearly 2 decades. There was the elementary school where my mother used to teach, the hardware store that had been my father's life's work, the church where we'd attended every Sunday, until the Sunday I was no longer welcome. "Are you nervous?" Oliver asked as we turned onto Elm Street. "Terrified," I admitted. Danny had suggested we meet at his house first, neutral territory, where we could talk before seeing our parents. He lived 3 blocks from our childhood home, in a modest colonial that screamed middle-class stability. As we pulled into his driveway, I caught sight of a man in his late 20s working in the front yard. He looked exactly like our father had at that age. Danny straightened up when he heard the car doors, and for a moment we just stared at each other. The last time I'd seen him, he was 11 years old, all knees and elbows and soccer cleats. Now he was a grown man, with kind eyes and our mother's nervous smile. "Viv?" he said uncertainly. "Hi, Danny." We hugged awkwardly, 18 years of absence making siblings feel like strangers. Then he turned to Oliver, and his face lit up with genuine wonder. "Jesus, you really do look like Dad, but taller and less grumpy." Oliver laughed, and just like that, some of the tension broke. Inside Danny's house, over coffee and homemade cookies his wife had left before taking their kids to soccer practice, he filled in the gaps that 18 years had left behind. "After you left," he said, avoiding the word kicked out, "things changed. Mom stopped teaching Sunday school. Dad barely spoke for months. They never talked about you, but your absence was everywhere. They told you I ran away," I reminded him. "That's what they said, but even as a kid, I knew something was off. You loved us. You wouldn't have just disappeared without saying goodbye to me." He was right. One of the things that had haunted me most was leaving Danny without explanation. I'd imagined him wondering where his big sister had gone, why she'd abandoned him without a word. I wanted to say goodbye, but Dad said if I ever tried to contact the family, he'd call the police and have me arrested for trespassing. Danny's face darkened. He really said that? Among other things. What other things? I glanced at Oliver, who nodded encouragingly. He'd insisted on knowing the whole truth, and he deserved to hear it. "He called me a tramp. Mom called Oliver a bastard before he was even born. They said I was dead to them, and that bringing shame on the family was unforgivable." "That's not," Danny started, then stopped. "That's not the story they told me." "What story did they tell you?" Danny looked uncomfortable, like he was about to reveal something that would hurt me all over again. "They said you got pregnant and decided you wanted to live your own life, that you told them you didn't need family holding you back, that you were going to prove you could make it on your own. They made it sound like you rejected them." The rewriting of history was even more complete than I had realized. In their version, I was the one who chose independence over family. I was the one who delivered the ultimatum. "Danny, I begged them to let me stay. I promised I'd finish school, that I'd find a way to make it work. I was 16 and terrified, and all I wanted was for my parents to help me figure out how to handle the situation." "I believe you," he said quietly, "especially now that I have kids of my own. I can't imagine throwing out Sarah or Michael for anything, let alone a mistake they made as teenagers." Oliver had been listening intently, and now he spoke up. "What changed? Why do they want to meet me now?" Danny sighed deeply. "Dad had his heart attack 14 months ago, a big one. He was in the ICU for 2 weeks, and for a while we thought we were going to lose him. Mom broke down completely. That's when she started talking about regrets." "What kind of regrets?" I asked. "She said she wondered about you every day, whether you were okay, whether you'd finished school, whether you were happy. She said she dreamed about a grandchild she'd never met and woke up crying. The image of my mother crying over the grandson she'd rejected before he was born stirred something complicated in my chest. Not sympathy exactly, but something close to it. What about Dad? Danny's expression grew more serious. Dad's different now. The heart attack scared him. He's not the same man who ruled our house with an iron fist when we were kids. He's softer, I guess. More aware that life doesn't last forever. Has he said he regrets what happened? Not in so many words, but he asked me to find you. That's not something the old Dad would have done. I wasn't sure how to process this information. The parents who lived in my memory were rigid, unforgiving people who prioritized reputation over relationship. The idea that they'd spent 18 years regretting their decision didn't align with the people who'd thrown me out without a second thought. "There's something else," Danny said, and his tone made both Oliver and me sit up straighter. "Something I didn't know until recently, and I think it might change how you feel about what happened." He went to a desk in the corner of the room and pulled out a manila folder. "After I found you, I started asking questions. Real questions. Not just accepting the story we'd always been told. I talked to people who were around back then. Neighbors, family friends, people from church. My stomach tightened. What did you find? Do you remember the Hendersons? They lived next door when we were kids." I nodded. Mrs. Henderson had been my mother's closest friend, always over for coffee and gossip. She's in her 70s now, lives in a retirement community in Hartford. When I told her I'd found you, she got this look on her face and said, "Oh, that poor girl. Your parents were so wrong about that situation." "Wrong? How?" Danny opened the folder and pulled out what looked like old photographs and documents. "Mrs. Henderson told me something she'd never told anyone. The week after you left, she overheard a phone conversation between Mom and Jake Tornfield's mother." At the mention of Jake's name, I felt that familiar twist of anger in my stomach. He'd been my first love, my first heartbreak, and the father who'd never acknowledged his son. What did she overhear? Jake's mother called to apologize. She said Jake had told her the truth about what happened and that she was ashamed of her son for abandoning his responsibilities. She offered to help with expenses to make sure you had what you needed for the baby. This was news to me. Jake's family was one of the wealthiest in Millbrook Falls. His father owned 3 car dealerships, and his mother was active in every charity organization in town. If they'd been willing to help, what did Mom say? Danny's expression grew more serious. According to Mrs. Henderson, Mom told Jake's mother that it was too late, that you'd already left town and made it clear you didn't want help from anyone. She said the family had decided it was better to let you handle the consequences of your choices on your own. The room went completely silent. Oliver reached over and took my hand, sensing that this revelation was significant, even if he didn't fully understand why. "She lied," I whispered. "It gets worse," Danny said gently. "Mrs. Henderson also overheard Mom on the phone with the guidance counselor at school. Mrs. Patterson called asking if there was anything the family needed, if there were resources that could help you finish your education while dealing with the pregnancy." I remembered Mrs. Patterson's kindness, how she'd helped me find the youth shelter and apply for assistance programs, but I'd never known she'd reached out to my family. Mom told her that you'd decided school wasn't a priority anymore, that you were planning to get your GED eventually, but that traditional education wasn't what you wanted. "I was on the honor roll," I said, my voice barely audible. "I had been planning to apply to nursing school after graduation. She knew that." "There's more," Danny said, pulling out another document. "This is a bank statement I found in Dad's old papers when I was helping them organize their finances after his heart attack." He handed me a photocopy of a bank statement from November 2005, 1 month after I'd been kicked out. There, highlighted in yellow, was a deposit for $2,500 with the notation, "Tornfield, support." Jake's family had sent money that was meant to help me and their grandchild, money that my parents had accepted and, what? Kept? Where did this money go?
I asked, though I was afraid of the answer. I confronted Dad about it. He broke down completely, said they put it in a savings account, telling themselves they'd give it to you when you came back home. But you never came back, and eventually they used it for other things. Other things like what? Danny's soccer equipment, Mom's new car, home improvements. They'd taken money meant for their pregnant, homeless daughter and used it to improve their own lives while I slept in a shelter and worked nights at a diner to survive.
Oliver squeezed my hand harder. Mom, are you okay? I wasn't okay. I was furious, heartbroken, and completely overwhelmed by the scope of their deception. It wasn't just that they'd kicked me out, they'd actively sabotaged any attempts by others to help me, and they'd profited from my situation while letting the entire community believe I'd chosen to abandon my family. There's one more thing, Danny said softly, and this is the hardest part to tell you. I didn't think there could be anything worse than what he'd already revealed, but the look on his face suggested otherwise. What is it? 3 years after you left, Jake Thornfield came to the house. I was 14, and I remember because it was such a big deal, the football star showing up at our door. I thought he was there to see me about something, but he asked to speak to Mom and Dad privately. My heart was pounding now. What did he want? I didn't know at the time, but Mrs. Henderson told me. She was in her garden and overheard the whole conversation through the open windows. Danny paused, clearly struggling with whether to continue. Danny, just tell me. Jake wanted to know how to find you. He said he'd made a mistake, that he wanted to take responsibility for his son. He'd brought money, a lot of money, and he wanted to help set up a college fund for Oliver and make sure you had what you needed. The world tilted on its axis. Jake had tried to find me? He'd wanted to support Oliver? Dad told him you moved to California and made it clear you didn't want anything to do with anyone from Millbrook Falls. He said you'd specifically asked that Jake never be given any information about your whereabouts because you wanted a fresh start. Another lie. Another deliberate sabotage of any chance I had at building a better life for my son. Jake left the money anyway, $5,000, with instructions that it should go to Oliver's education if they ever found a way to contact you. Let me guess, I said bitterly. They kept that too. Donnie admitted when I confronted him. Said they put it aside for your eventual return, but when years passed and you didn't come back, they spent it. They spent it. I stood up abruptly, needing to move, to pace, to do something with the rage that was building in my chest. For 18 years, I'd carried the weight of believing that no one had cared, that Jake had simply walked away without a second thought, that my parents had been disappointed but ultimately justified in their decision. Now I was learning that multiple people had tried to help, that Jake had wanted to be involved in his son's life, and that my parents had systematically destroyed every opportunity for support that had come my way. Mom, Oliver said, standing up to steady me, breathe. I looked at my son, this incredible young man I'd raised alone, this child who'd never known his father because I'd believed his father didn't want him, and felt something crack open inside my chest. All these years, I whispered. All these years, I thought we were completely on our own because no one cared. But people did care. People tried to help. I'm so sorry, Viv, Danny said. I had no idea. If I'd known even a fraction of this when I was younger, you were a child. This isn't your fault. But it was someone's fault. It was the fault of two people who'd let pride and fear turn them into something monstrous, who'd chosen their reputation over their daughter's welfare, and who'd spent 18 years maintaining lies that cost all of us relationships we should have had. Do they know that you know all this? I asked Danny. Dad knows I found the bank statements. Mom doesn't know about the conversations Mrs. Henderson overheard. They think I just tracked you down because I missed my sister and wanted Oliver to meet his grandparents. What do you think I should do? It was Oliver who answered. I think we should go meet them, but not the way they're expecting. I looked at my son,
This young man who'd inherited my determination and apparently my strategic thinking. What do you mean? They're expecting the grateful daughter who's finally come home. They're expecting to play the role of loving grandparents who always wondered about their grandson. But that's not what this is it? He was right. This wasn't a reunion. This wasn't a heartwarming story of family reconciliation. This was a reckoning. They need to know that we know the truth. All of it. And they need to understand that if they want any kind of relationship with us going forward, it starts with complete honesty about what they did. I looked at Danny, who was nodding slowly. He's right, Danny said. They've spent so many years believing their own version of events that I think they actually convinced themselves it was true. Someone needs to force them to face reality. Will you come with us? I asked Danny. When we confront them? Are you sure you want to do this? It's going to destroy them. They destroyed me first, I said simply. And they destroyed 18 years of Oliver's relationship with his father because they couldn't admit they'd made a mistake. That was the part that hurt the most. I could forgive them for hurting me. I'd been a child, and I'd survived their cruelty and built something better. But Oliver had lost the chance to know his father, and Jake had lost the chance to know his son, all because my parents had decided their pride was more important than truth. Yes, Danny said finally. I'll come with you. It's time they faced what they really did. We spent another hour planning exactly how we would handle the confrontation. Danny would call our parents and arrange a meeting for the next day. He would tell them he'd found me and that I was willing to let them meet Oliver, but that there were things we needed to discuss first.
He wouldn't mention what we'd discovered about the money, the phone calls, or the systematic sabotage of every attempt to help me. That revelation would come from me, when they were face to face with the daughter they'd tried so hard to erase and the grandson they'd never bothered to know. As we prepared to leave Danny's house, he handed me one final document. What's this? Jake Thornfield's current address and phone number. He still lives in Millbrook Falls. He's married now, has 2 other kids, but according to people I've talked to, he never forgot about Oliver. He asks about you sometimes, apparently. Wonders what happened to the girl he got pregnant in high school. I stared at the piece of paper in my hands. Jake Thornfield. The boy who'd broken my heart and abandoned me when I needed him most. Except now I was learning that maybe he hadn't abandoned me at all. Maybe he'd tried to step up, and my parents had prevented it. Are you going to call him? Oliver asked, reading over my shoulder. I don't know, I admitted. How do you tell someone you've spent 18 years hating that they tried to do the right thing and you never knew? Maybe you start by telling him he has an incredible son, Danny suggested. Oliver smiled at that, but I could see the uncertainty in his eyes. His entire understanding of his origin story was shifting, and he was handling it better than I was. As we drove back to Hartford that evening, Oliver was quiet for a long time. Finally, he spoke up. Mom, are you going to be okay with all of this? I honestly don't know, I said. For 18 years, I've carried the story about being the daughter who disappointed her family so badly that they cut her off completely. It shaped everything. How I saw myself, how hard I worked to prove I was worth something, how I raised you. And now? Now I'm learning that I was never the disappointment. I was the victim of people who were so concerned with protecting their image that they were willing to sacrifice their daughter and grandchild to maintain the lie. Are you angry? I'm furious, I admitted, but I'm also something else. For the first time in 18 years, I'm not carrying the weight of thinking I deserved what happened to me. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, thinking about the conversation we would have the next day. My parents were expecting a reunion. They were expecting forgiveness and reconciliation and the chance to play loving grandparents to the grandson they'd never acknowledged. Is it? Because that's not how I remember that Tuesday night in October when you told me I was dead to you and had 1 hour to pack my things. Oliver's hand found mine,
a gesture of support that didn't go unnoticed by my parents. They were both staring at our joined hands, perhaps beginning to understand that their grandson's loyalty lay with the mother who'd raised him, not the grandparents who'd never acknowledged his existence. You were 16 and pregnant. We were disappointed, yes, but we were trying to help you understand the consequences of your choices. By throwing me out, by telling me never to contact the family again, by threatening to have me arrested if I tried to come home, we were hoping some tough love would make you see reason, my mother said quietly. What reason? What exactly did you want me to see? That keeping that baby would ruin my life? That I was too young to be a mother? That there were other options? The room went dead silent. Oliver's hand tightened on mine, and I saw Danny's face pale. Other options, I repeated slowly. You mean abortion? We meant what was best for everyone involved, my father said stiffly. And when I refused to consider that option, you decided the best course of action was to make me homeless? We thought you'd come to your senses and come back. We thought you'd realize you needed our help. I did realize I needed your help. That's why I begged you to let me stay. That's why I promised I'd finish school and make it work. But you weren't interested in helping me raise Oliver. You wanted me to get rid of him. We wanted you to have a future, my father said. I have a future, a better one than you ever could have imagined, and I built it without you, despite your efforts to sabotage it. Sabotage? My mother looked genuinely confused. What are you talking about? Now I knew the truth. I hadn't failed them. They had failed me, spectacularly and repeatedly, and then spent nearly 2 decades covering it up. But I also knew that the scared, powerless 16-year-old who'd begged them to let her stay home was gone forever. In her place was a woman who knew her worth, who wouldn't accept less than she deserved, and who was finally free from the weight of their false narrative about who she was and what she'd done. The confrontation had shattered their lies, but it had also freed me from them in a way I never expected. Whatever happened next would be on my terms, not theirs. In the final part of this story, I'll tell you what happened when my parents tried to follow through with their promises and how a phone call from Jake Thornfield changed everything Oliver and I thought we knew about forgiveness, family, and second chances. This is the final part of my story about how my parents kicked me out at 16 for being pregnant and how 18 years later, the truth about what they'd done came to light. In the last part, I told you about the confrontation where we forced them to face their lies. Now I'm going to tell you what happened when they tried to make things right, and one phone call changed everything I thought I knew about second chances.
4 days after our confrontation, I was working a late shift at Hartford General when my phone rang. It was 11:30 p.m., and calls that late usually meant emergencies, so I stepped into the supply closet to answer. Vivian? This is Jake Thornfield. I nearly dropped the phone. After all these years, after learning the truth about his attempts to find me, hearing his voice was like a shock to my system. Jake? I managed to keep my voice steady, professional. Your father called me yesterday. He told me what really happened 18 years ago, why you disappeared, why I never heard from you. There was a long pause, and I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line. I've been thinking about you for 18 years, he continued, wondering if you were okay, if the baby was okay, if I'd done something so terrible that you never wanted to see me again. You didn't do anything terrible, I said quietly. You were 18 and scared. We both were. I was more than scared. I was a coward. But I tried to fix it, Vivian. I came to your house, I brought money, I asked how to find you. They told me you'd moved across the country and never wanted to hear from me again. I know, Danny told me. I should have tried harder. I should have looked for you myself instead of trusting them. I leaned against the supply room wall, processing the conversation I'd imagined having for nearly 2 decades. What did your father tell you exactly? The truth.
that they kicked you out for being pregnant, that they kept the money my parents sent, that they lied to everyone who tried to help you, that they destroyed every chance we had to work together as parents. His voice broke on the last words. He also told me I have a son named Oliver who's about to graduate high school with honors, who's been accepted to 3 different colleges, and who doesn't know I exist. He knows you exist. He just thinks you chose not to be part of his life. Can I change that? Is it too late to change that? The question I had been dreading and hoping for in equal measure. That's not up to me anymore, Jake. Oliver is 18. If he wants to meet you, that's his decision. Would you ask him? Would you tell him what really happened and let him decide? I closed my eyes, thinking about the conversation I'd need to have with my son. I'll talk to him. But Jake, you need to understand something. Oliver is an incredible kid, but he's not the missing piece that's going to fix whatever regrets you've been carrying. He has his own life, his own plans, his own feelings about the situation. I know. I want the chance to know him, and I want him to know that I never stopped thinking about either of you. We talked for another 20 minutes. Jake told me about his life. He was married to a woman named Rebecca, had 2 daughters aged 12 and 10, ran his own accounting firm. He said he'd told his wife about me years ago, about the son he'd never known, and that she supported his desire to reach out if the opportunity ever arose. What about your parents? I asked. Do they know your calling? My mom died 6 years ago, but before she passed, she told me she'd never forgiven herself for not doing more to help you. She said she should have found a way to contact you directly instead of trusting your parents to pass along support. Another person who'd carried guilt about my situation. Another casualty of my parents' deception. And your father? He's excited about the possibility of meeting Oliver. He's been talking about the grandson he never got to know. The irony wasn't lost on me. Jake's family had wanted to help, had tried to help, sent money and support. My own family had rejected us and then sabotaged every attempt at assistance. When I got home that night, Oliver was in the kitchen doing homework at our dining table, surrounded by college brochures and financial aid forms. "How was work?" he asked, looking up from his laptop. "Complicated. We need to talk." I told him about Jake's call, about the conversation we'd had, about the father who'd tried to find us but had been blocked by lies. Oliver listened with the same intense focus he'd given to learning about his grandparents' deception, processing information that was reshaping his understanding of his own story. "He wants to meet me," Oliver said. It wasn't a question. Yes. "What do you think I should do?" "What do you want to do?" Oliver was quiet for a long time, staring at the college acceptance letters spread across the table. I used to imagine what it would be like to meet him. When I was little, I'd make up stories about why he wasn't around. Sometimes he was a soldier overseas, sometimes he was sick, sometimes he was just waiting for the right moment to come back. And now? Now I know he was an 18-year-old kid who made a mistake and then tried to fix it. That's different from what I imagined, but it's also better in some ways. How so? Because it means he didn't abandon us on purpose. It means someone else made that choice for him. The next evening, Jake came to our house in Hartford. I'd offered to meet somewhere neutral, but Oliver had insisted on home territory. If he wants to know me, he should see where I grew up. When the doorbell rang at 7 o'clock, Oliver answered it. I hung back in the kitchen, giving them a moment to see each other for the first time. "Oliver?" I heard Jake's voice, uncertain and hopeful. "Yeah, you must be Jake." "I am. Thank you for agreeing to meet me."
They came into the living room together, and I got my first look at Jake Thornfield in 18 years. He was still handsome, though his hair was thinning and he'd gained weight around his middle. He looked successful, well-dressed, nervous as hell. But what struck me most was how much he and Oliver resembled each other. They had the same build, the same way of standing with their hands in their pockets when they were thinking. Oliver had gotten his height from Jake and his smile. "This is a beautiful home," Jake said, looking around our living room with obvious appreciation. "Mom worked really hard for it," Oliver said simply. The conversation started awkwardly, with the kind of small talk that happens between strangers, but gradually, as they found common ground, a shared love of baseball, similar taste in music, both had been good students, the tension began to ease. Jake told Oliver about his half-sisters, showed him pictures on his phone. Oliver talked about school, his plans for college, his part-time job at the local bookstore. Normal father-son conversation, 18 years late. After an hour, I excused myself to make coffee, giving them privacy to talk without me monitoring every word. When I returned, Oliver was showing Jake his acceptance letters, explaining his plans to study engineering at UConn. "That's incredible," Jake was saying. "I always loved math and science in school. Looks like you inherited that." "Mom says I get my analytical mind from her, but maybe it comes from both sides." Jake looked at me with something like gratitude in his eyes. "Your mother did an amazing job raising you. I can see what kind of man you've become, and I'm so proud to be your father, even though I didn't earn that pride." "You're here now," Oliver said simply. "That's what matters." They talked for another hour before Jake prepared to leave. At the door, he turned to Oliver with obvious hesitation. "I know I don't have the right to ask this, but would you be open to staying in touch? Maybe having dinner sometime or coming to meet your sisters?" Oliver looked at me, then back at Jake. "I'd like that, but I need you to understand something. Mom raised me. She's the one who came to every school play and helped with every homework assignment and taught me right from wrong. You're my biological father, but she's my parent." "I understand completely. I'm not trying to replace what you have with your mom. I'm just grateful for the chance to be part of your life going forward." After Jake left, Oliver and I sat on the couch, processing what had just happened. "How do you feel?" I asked. "Good. Different, but good. He seems like a decent person who made a mistake when he was young." "Are you comfortable with staying in touch with him?" "Yeah, I think so. He's not what I expected, but he's not disappointing either. Just human." Over the next few weeks, Oliver and Jake began building a relationship. They texted regularly, had dinner twice, and Jake even came to Oliver's graduation. It wasn't the father-son bond that might have developed if they'd had 18 years together, but it was something real and meaningful. Meanwhile, my parents were working their way through the list of amends I'd demanded. Danny reported that they'd called Mrs. Patterson and apologized for lying about my intentions regarding school. They'd reached out to the Hendersons and admitted that I hadn't chosen to leave. They even called Jake's father to apologize for their deception. The hardest call, according to Danny, had been to Mrs. Sullivan at the church, confessing that their story about their wayward daughter had been a fabrication designed to protect their reputation. "How are they handling it?" I asked Danny during one of our weekly check-ins. "Better than I expected, honestly. I think they're relieved to finally tell the truth, even though it's embarrassing. Mom especially seems lighter somehow, like she's been carrying a weight for 18 years. And Dad? He's struggling more. His pride took a real hit, and he's having to face the fact that his actions cost him his daughter and 18 years with his grandson. But he's doing the work you asked for." 6 weeks after our confrontation, my mother called me directly. "Vivian, I've finished making the calls you asked for. Everyone knows the truth now about what really happened."
How do people respond?
Mixed reactions. Some are angry that we lied for so long. Others are just sad about the whole situation. Mrs. Patterson wants your phone number so she can reach out to you directly. I'd always loved Mrs. Patterson. The idea of reconnecting with her felt like reclaiming another piece of my past that had been stolen by my parents' deception. I'd like that. Vivian, I know I don't have the right to ask this, but is there any chance you and Oliver might consider having dinner with us? We've done everything you asked. We've told the truth to everyone we lied to. We want to show you that we can be better than we were. I considered the request. Part of me wanted to refuse, to keep them at arm's length indefinitely as punishment for what they'd done. But another part of me recognized that they were trying to change, and that Oliver deserved the chance to know his grandparents if they could prove themselves worthy of the title. One dinner, I said finally. At a restaurant, not your house. And if you say or do anything that makes Oliver uncomfortable, it's over. Thank you. Thank you so much. We met at Romano's, a family restaurant in Millbrook Falls that had been there since I was a child. My parents arrived early and were waiting in a booth when Oliver and I walked in. The difference in their demeanor was immediately apparent. Gone was the defensive posture they'd maintained during our confrontation. Instead, they looked nervous, hopeful, and genuinely remorseful.
Oliver, my mother said, standing up as we approached. You look so much like your mother when she was your age. Thank you for inviting us to dinner, Oliver said politely, shaking both their hands. Conversation during dinner was cautious, but genuine. My parents asked Oliver about school, his interests, his plans for college. They showed him pictures of his cousins, Danny's children, and talked about family traditions he'd missed. But they were careful not to overstep. They didn't push for physical affection or assume intimacy they hadn't earned. They didn't make excuses for their past behavior or try to minimize what they'd done. Most importantly, they acknowledged what I'd accomplished as a single mother. Your mom should be proud of the job she did raising you, my father said. You're exactly the kind of young man any parent would be honored to call their son. She is proud, and I'm proud of her too. She built a good life for us. Toward the end of the evening, my mother reached into her purse and pulled out an envelope. This is for your college fund, she said, handing it to Oliver. It's not enough to make up for what we tepped 18 years ago, but it's what we can afford now. Oliver looked at me before opening it. Inside was a check for $5,000. You don't have to, I started. Yes, we do. We stole money that was meant for his education. This is our attempt to make that right. As we prepared to leave, my mother asked the question I'd been expecting. Can we do this again? Can we have another dinner, maybe meet for coffee sometimes? I looked at Oliver, who nodded slightly. We can try, I said, but this is a probationary relationship. You're going to have to prove over time that you can be trusted with Oliver's feelings. We understand. Over the following months, we had dinner with my parents once a month. The relationship developed slowly, carefully, with clear boundaries. Oliver enjoyed getting to know his grandparents, but he never forgot who had raised him or where his primary loyalty lay. Jake became a regular part of our lives too, though in a different way. He and Rebecca invited us to their house for barbecues, and Oliver developed a sweet relationship with his half-sisters. It wasn't the traditional family structure, but it worked for all of us. The most unexpected development came 6 months after our first confrontation. I was at work when I got a call from Mrs. Patterson, the guidance counselor who'd helped me find the youth shelter all those years ago. Vivian, I have a proposal for you. Would you be interested in speaking to teenage mothers about your experience, about how you managed to finish your education and build a career despite the obstacles?
The request led to my becoming a volunteer mentor with pregnant and parenting teens in Hartford. Every month, I spoke to young women who reminded me of myself at 16, scared, alone, facing an uncertain future. I told them about sleeping in parks and working night shifts, about studying for nursing school with a baby on my hip, about the long journey from homelessness to home ownership. But most importantly, I told them that their circumstances didn't define their potential. One evening, after speaking to a group of young mothers at a community center, a 16-year-old named Taylor approached me. "Miss Cross, my parents want me to give up my baby for adoption. They say keeping her will ruin my life." Looking at her terrified face, I saw myself 18 years earlier. "What do you want to do?" I asked. "I want to keep her. I love her already, but I don't know how I will manage school and work and everything else." "It won't be easy," I told her honestly. "It's the hardest thing you'll ever do, but it's not impossible. And there are people who will help you if you decide that's the path you want to take." 6 months later, Taylor graduated high school with her infant daughter in the audience. She'd gotten into the community college nursing program with the recommendation letter I'd written for her. Looking at her walking across that stage, I realized something profound. My parents' rejection hadn't just shaped my life, it had prepared me to help other young women facing similar challenges. Their cruelty had taught me empathy. Their abandonment had taught me the value of showing up. 2 years after our initial confrontation, Oliver graduated from UConn with a degree in engineering. At his graduation party, held in the backyard of our Hartford home, 3 generations of Crosses gathered together for the first time. My parents were there, still walking on eggshells but genuinely proud of their grandson. Jake and his family came, with Rebecca making her famous potato salad, and the girls presenting Oliver with a photo album of their favorite memories together. Danny brought his wife and kids, finally giving Oliver the cousins he never knew he had. Mrs. Patterson came too, along with Frank from the diner where I'd worked all those years ago, and several of the teenage mothers I'd mentored who considered Oliver something of a big brother. As I looked around at the gathering, this complicated, imperfect, hard-won family we'd built, I felt something I never expected to feel about my parents' rejection. Gratitude. Not gratitude for the pain they'd caused, but gratitude for what that pain had taught me, about resilience, about the difference between blood relations and chosen family, about the power of refusing to let other people's limitations define your possibilities. Oliver gave a speech that evening, thanking everyone who'd been a part of his journey. When he got to me, he said something that made everyone cry.
My mom taught me that family isn't about who shares your DNA or who was there from the beginning. Family is about who shows up when it matters, who supports your dreams, and who loves you through your mistakes. By that definition, I have the biggest family in the world. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home, Oliver and I sat on our back porch, watching the sun set over the neighborhood where we'd built our life. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Grandma and Grandpa hadn't kicked you out?" he asked. I considered the question seriously. Sometimes, but you know what? I think we might have had smaller lives. I might have stayed in Millbrook Falls, never pushed myself to become more than I thought I could be. You might not have developed the independence and strength that make you who you are. So you're glad it happened? I'm glad we survived it. I'm glad we built something better than what we lost. And I'm especially glad that their worst decision gave me the chance to make the best decisions of my life. 3 years later, I walked Oliver down the aisle at his wedding to Sarah, a brilliant engineer he'd met in graduate school. My parents were there, finally able to celebrate a family milestone they hadn't missed by choice. Jake walked the mother of the groom to her seat, a gesture that acknowledged the unconventional but genuine family we'd become. As I danced with my son at his reception, he whispered in my ear, "Thank you for never giving up on us." "Thank you for being worth fighting for," I whispered back. People sometimes ask me if I've forgiven my parents completely. The answer is complicated. I've forgiven them enough to allow them in our lives, enough to let them know their grandson, enough to acknowledge that they were flawed people who made terrible decisions out of fear and pride. But I've never forgotten the 16-year-old girl who stood on their porch, homeless and pregnant, begging for the love she thought was unconditional. I carry her story as a reminder that family is something you build, not something you're born into, and that the people who truly love you will never make that love conditional on your perfection. Today, I'm the Director of Maternal and Pediatric Services at Hartford General. I've been married for 2 years to David, a pediatric surgeon who loves both Oliver and me unconditionally. We're expecting our first child together, Oliver's half-sibling, who will grow up knowing they're wanted and celebrated. I still mentor teenage mothers, and I still tell them that their circumstances don't define their possibilities. I tell them about the house I bought, the career I built, the son I raised, and the family I created out of nothing but determination and love. Most importantly, I tell them what I learned from being discarded by the people who were supposed to love me most, that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the catalyst for the best life you never could have imagined. My parents thought they were throwing away a problem when they threw me away. Instead, they threw away 18 years with an incredible grandson and missed the chance to witness their daughter becoming exactly the kind of person any parent should be proud to raise. Their loss was my gain, and ultimately, our gain. Because Oliver and I didn't just survive their rejection, we used it as fuel to build something beautiful, strong, and unshakable. And that's a victory no one can ever take away from us. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.